My parents forced me to sit in the rain at my sister's wedding while she poured wine on me and called me dirt. Then my husband arrived and fired the groom. My name is Maya, and I am 32 years old. As a landscape architect, I am used to weathering storms, but nothing could have prepared me for the freezing downpour outside the Crystal Marquee tent in Napa Valley. Inside, the temperature was controlled to a perfect 72 degrees. Inside, my younger sister Chloe was holding court in a Vera Wang gown that cost more than my car, while my parents David and Sarah laughed with investors clinking glasses of Chateau Margaux that cost $500 a bottle. Outside, I was shivering on a white plastic garden chair, the kind you buy at a discount store for $10. My teal dress was soaked through, clinging to my skin like a second layer of ice. Rainwater dripped from my nose and mixed with the hot tears I refused to let fall. I watched through those glass walls as the people who were supposed to love me celebrated their golden child. Just as I reached for the door handle, hoping to slip inside for a moment of warmth, my phone buzzed in my lap. It was a text from my mother. "Do not come inside, Maya. Brad says you look like a drowned rat and you will ruin the feng shui for the investors. Stay out there until the reception starts or go wait in your car. We cannot afford for you to embarrass us right now." I stared at the screen, my thumb hovering over the reply button, but I could not type. My fingers were too numb. Inside the tent, I saw Brad the groom pointing at me and laughing. He said something to his best man, and they both looked at me with pure disgust. Brad was the golden ticket my family had been waiting for. He was a high-flying sales director about to close a $50 million merger that would make him the CEO of a massive tech conglomerate. To my parents, he was a savior. To them, my husband Elijah was just a man who drove a beat-up truck and dug holes for a living. They had no idea that the man they called a loser was currently driving toward this vineyard with the power to end Brad's career with a single signature. Before I tell you about the most satisfying moment of my life, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever been the black sheep of your family just for being yourself. To understand why I was sitting in the mud while my sister sat on a throne, you have to understand the last 24 hours. The humiliation did not start with the rain. It started the moment I arrived at my parents' estate yesterday morning. I had spent weeks working on a special wedding gift for Chloe. Since I am a landscape architect and also a potter, I had designed and handcrafted a set of ceramic dinnerware glazed in a custom shade of blue that matched her wedding theme. It was worth at least $3,000 in retail value, but to me, it was a labor of love. I walked into the living room holding the heavy box, expecting a smile, or at least a thank you. Chloe was sitting on the velvet sofa surrounded by orange Hermes boxes and Tiffany blue bags. "What is this?" she asked, looking at my box with suspicion. "It is your wedding gift," I said, smiling. "I made it myself. It is a full dinner service for 12. Chloe opened the box, pulled out one of the plates and frowned. It was a beautiful piece, rustic but elegant. She turned it over, looking for a brand name, and when she did not find one, she scoffed. "Maya, are you serious? This looks like something you dug up from the dirt in your backyard." I registered for bone china. Do you know what bone china is? It is imported from England. This is just heavy mud. My mother Sarah walked in, sipping her morning coffee, and sighed. "Maya, why do you always have to be so cheap? Your sister is marrying a man who makes 7 figures. They're going to be entertaining senators and CEOs. They cannot serve filet mignon on your arts and crafts projects." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "Mom, this is high-end stoneware. My clients pay thousands for these sets. Your clients are people who pay you to play in the dirt," my father David chimed in from the doorway, adjusting his silk tie. "Let us be honest, Maya. You brought this because you could not afford the crystal vase on her registry. We get it. You married Elijah and now you have to count pennies. But do not insult your sister with this garbage on her big day." Garbage. They called my work garbage. Chloe dropped the plate back into the box with a careless thud, and I heard something crack. "Just take it away," she said, waving her hand. Put it in the garage or something. I do not want Brad to see it. He hates clutter. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that Elijah and I were not poor. I wanted to tell them that the beat-up truck Elijah drove was just for his site visits, because he liked to stay grounded. I wanted to tell them that my husband, the man they called a ditch digger, was actually the founder of Horizon Capital, the very venture capital firm that was currently reviewing the acquisition of Brad Company. But I bit my tongue. Elijah and I had agreed to keep his wealth a secret for now. He wanted to know that my family loved me for me, not for his money, and every time they opened their mouths they proved him right. They did not love me. They loved status. I carried the box back to my rental car, my heart heavy. I called Elijah from the driveway. "Hey, babe," he answered, his voice warm and steady over the roar of an engine. "I am finishing up the survey at the resort site. I will be there tomorrow morning. How are they treating you?" I could not tell him the truth. If I told him they called my work garbage and broke the plate, he would turn the car around and burn the wedding to the ground. Elijah was protective like that. "It is fine," I lied, my voice shaking slightly. "Just wedding stress. You know how Mom gets." "Hold on, Maya," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "I know that tone. Did they say something about the truck again?" I forced a laugh. "Just the usual. Dad asked if you were going to park the monstrosity down the street so you would not lower the property value." Elijah chuckled darkly. "Let them talk. Tomorrow is going to be interesting. I just got the final due diligence report on Brad Company. Let us just say the numbers he has been bragging about are a little creative." "Creative?" I asked. Fraudulent, Elijah corrected. "The guy is cooking the books to pump up the valuation before the merger. He thinks he is about to cash out with $10 million. He has no idea I am the one signing the check. And after tomorrow, I might be signing his termination letter instead." That was the only thing that got me through the rest of the day. The knowledge that the power dynamic was about to shift violently. But I had no idea how bad things would get before that happened. Fast forward to this afternoon. The ceremony was scheduled for 4 o'clock in the vineyard garden. The forecast had called for rain all week, but Chloe insisted on an outdoor ceremony because she wanted the photos to look like a French countryside spread in Vogue magazine. When the clouds opened up and the rain started pouring down, chaos ensued. The guests rushed toward the glass marquee tent. I tried to help my grandmother, who walks with a cane, navigate the slippery grass. By the time I got her inside, I was soaked. My hair was plastered to my skull, and my dress was dark with water. I stepped into the warm, dry tent, sighing with relief. But before I could take 2 steps, Brad appeared in front of me, blocking my path. He was holding a glass of red wine and wearing a smirk that made my skin crawl. "Whoa there! Stop right there!" he said loud enough for the nearby guests to hear. "Look at you! You are dripping muddy water all over the white carpet." "Brad, it is pouring outside," I said, trying to brush past him. "I just need to grab a towel." "No can do," he said, stepping in front of me again. "This carpet cost $5,000. And honestly, you smell like wet dog. It is really off-putting for my investors." I looked around for my parents. My mother was standing 10 feet away, talking to the wife of a bank executive. She saw me. She saw Brad blocking me. And she turned her back, pretending not to notice. "Brad, please," I said, my teeth starting to chatter. "I am the maid of honor, sister. I need to dry off." "You are a landscaping architect," Brad sneered. "You are used to being wet and dirty, right? It is your natural habitat. Why do not you wait outside until the rain stops? You are ruining the aesthetic in here." That was when Chloe walked up. She looked perfect in her dry, pristine gown. I thought she was coming to save me. I thought despite everything she was still my sister. "Chloe, tell him to let me in," I pleaded. "I am freezing." Chloe looked me up and down, her lip curling in disgust. "God, Maya, he is right. You look hideous. And that dress? Is that the one you wore to Cousin Jenny's wedding 3 years ago? You could not even buy a new dress for my wedding. It is a classic vintage piece I defended weekly. And I spent my budget on your gift." "The gift, you mean the mud bowls," Chloe laughed. "Look, just go outside. You are dripping on my train." She gestured to the security guard, a burly man in a black suit. Please escort my sister to the patio area. She needs to dry off before she is allowed back in. The guard grabbed my arm. Ma'am, you need to step outside. I looked at my parents again. My father was watching now. He raised his glass of champagne to Brad and nodded approvingly, as if establishing dominance over the sister-in-law was a smart business move. I let the guard lead me out. As the glass doors slid shut behind me, cutting off the warmth and the music, I saw them laughing. Brad said something, and the whole circle of investors threw their heads back in amusement. I sat down on the wet plastic chair, the rain soaking me to the bone. I pulled out my phone and dialed Elijah. "Where are you?" I whispered into the phone, my voice breaking. "I am pulling into the driveway now," he said. "I can hear you crying, Maya." "What did they do?" "Just get here," I sobbed. "Please, just get here." I hung up and looked through the glass. Brad was making a toast. He looked like a king. He had no idea that the man in the beat-up truck was about to walk through those doors and take his crown, his kingdom, and his dignity. The rain fell harder, but for the first time in 2 days, I did not feel cold. I felt the burning heat of anger, and I knew that when Elijah walked through those doors, mercy would not be on the menu. Let me take you back 24 hours to where this nightmare truly began. Because the humiliation at the altar was just the finale of a long and painful prelude. It started the moment I pulled my modest sedan into the circular driveway of my parents' estate. The house loomed over me, a massive colonial structure that had always felt more like a museum than a home. I turned off the ignition and took a deep breath, staring at the passenger seat. Resting there was a heavy cardboard box reinforced with tape. Inside was my wedding gift for Chloe. I had spent the last 3 months working on it in my studio late into the night. It was a hand-thrown ceramic dinner set service for 12. I had developed a custom glaze just for her, a deep iridescent teal that shifted into seafoam green at the edges, mimicking the ocean view from the venue she had chosen. In the world of artisanal pottery, a set like this would retail for thousands of dollars, but more importantly, it was a piece of my soul. I wanted to show my sister that despite our differences, despite the way she looked down on my career, I still loved her. I wanted to give her something real, something that would last longer than the champagne and the flowers. I lifted the box, my muscles straining under the weight, and walked up the stone path. The door was unlocked, so I let myself in. The air inside smelled of expensive lilies and floor wax. I found Chloe in the formal living room, lounging on a white velvet sofa that probably cost more than my entire college tuition. She was surrounded by an explosion of luxury orange Hermes boxes, Tiffany blue bags, and stacks of silk tissue paper. She looked up as I entered, her eyes scanning me from head to toe, lingering on my jeans and work boots with a familiar look of disdain. "I brought your gift," I said, forcing a smile as I set the box down on the coffee table. "I wanted to give it to you privately before the chaos starts tomorrow." Chloe raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. She leaned forward and ripped the tape off the box with a careless motion. When she pulled out the first dinner plate, the light caught the glaze shimmering beautifully. I held my breath, waiting for a reaction. I hoped for a smile. I hoped for a thank you. Instead, Chloe wrinkled her nose as if she had just opened a carton of spoiled milk. She held the plate with 2 fingers, keeping it away from her body like it was contaminated. "Maya, are you joking?" she scoffed, letting out a sharp, cruel laugh. She looked at me with wide, mocking eyes. "Is this a prank?" I felt my smile falter. "No," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "I made these. It is a full custom set. I thought you could use them for dinner parties." Chloe dropped the plate back into the box with a loud clatter that made me wince, praying it did not chip. "Maya, look around you." She gestured to the designer boxes surrounding her. "I registered for bone china, imported English bone china. Do you know what that is? It is delicate. It is translucent. It is refined. This thing you brought me is literally heavy mud. Who eats off of mud?" The insult hit me like a physical slap. Mud. She called my life's work mud. Brad and I are going to be hosting senators and tech CEOs, Chloe continued, her voice dripping with condescension. I cannot serve filet mignon on your little arts and crafts project. It is heavy, and it is ugly. Honestly, Maya, it is embarrassing that you even thought this was appropriate. Before I could defend myself, my mother Sarah swept into the room. She was holding a tablet tapping away at the seating chart, but she stopped when she saw the open box. What is the problem now? She asked, looking from Chloe's disgusted face to me. Maya brought me dirt plates, Chloe whined, kicking the box away from her legs. She expects me to put these on my dining table. My mother sighed the long, weary sigh of a woman who felt burdened by a disappointing child. She walked over and peered into the box, shaking her head. Maya, honestly, why do you always have to be so cheap? I am not being cheap, Mom, I protested, the heat rising in my cheeks. This is stoneware. It is durable and unique. Stop it, my mother snapped, cutting me off. Just stop. You need to understand the level we are operating at now. Your sister is marrying Brad. Do you understand who Brad is? He is closing a merger tomorrow that is going to value his company at $50 million. 50 million, Maya. He is a winner. He is elevating this entire family. She took a step closer to me, her eyes cold and hard. And then there is you. You went and married Elijah, a man who drives a rusted pickup truck that sounds like it is dying every time he pulls into our driveway, a man who wears flannel and digs holes for a living. You settled for less, and now you are trying to drag your sister down to your level with these cheap homemade gifts. I bit my tongue so hard I tasted copper. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them that Elijah did not just dig holes. I wanted to tell them that the rusted truck was something he kept because it was his grandfather's and he loved it. But in the garage of our modest home sat a classic car collection worth more than this entire house. I wanted to tell them that Elijah was the one buying Brad's company and that the merger they were bragging about was entirely dependent on my husband's signature. But I could not. I had promised Elijah I would let things play out. He wanted to see if they were capable of being decent human beings without the incentive of his wealth. Elijah works hard, I said quietly, my voice tight, and he treats me with respect, which is more than I can say for Brad. My mother laughed, a harsh sound that echoed in the high-ceiling room. Respect does not pay the bills, Maya, and it certainly does not buy bone china. Listen to me very clearly. Do not embarrass us this weekend. Take this box of mud and put it in the garage, or better yet, leave it in your car, and tell your husband to park that truck of his down the street tomorrow. I do not want it in the wedding photos. We have an image to maintain, and I will not let you or your poverty ruin the aesthetic of this wedding. She turned her back on me, dismissing me as if I were the help. Chloe was already back on her phone, ignoring my existence. I picked up the heavy box, the ceramics rattling inside like broken bones. I walked out of the house, blinking back tears of rage. They thought I was the poor relation. They thought I was the failure. As I loaded the box into my trunk, I looked back at the house one last time. They had no idea that the man in the rusted truck was holding their future in his hands, and tomorrow he was going to crush it. The drive to the Silver Creek Resort and Spa the next morning was tense. Elijah held my hand across the center console, his thumb rubbing circles on my knuckles, while I stared out the window at the rolling vineyards of Napa Valley. We pulled up to the entrance, a 5-star fortress of luxury paved with imported cobblestones and lined with Italian cypress trees. As Elijah maneuvered his battered Ford F-150 into the line of gleaming Bentleys and Porsches, the contrast was comical. I saw the valet wince as we approached. The truck was covered in dust from Elijah's site visit, and the engine sputtered with a loud cough before dying completely in front of the fountain. 2 valets in crisp white uniforms exchanged a look of pure panic. One of them actually stepped forward, his hand raised as if to stop us from exiting, clearly assuming we had taken a wrong turn on the way to a construction site. "Sir, deliveries are around the back," he said, his voice strained but polite, pointing down a service road. "The service entrance is the second left past the main gate." I felt my face heat up, a familiar mix of shame and defensiveness rising in my throat. I opened my mouth to correct him, to tell him that we were guests, that my sister was the bride, but Elijah just laughed. He opened his door and stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel. He was wearing his usual uniform, a faded plaid flannel shirt, tucked into well-worn jeans, and a baseball cap pulled low. He looked like a man who worked with his hands, because he was but in this setting surrounded by silk and linen. He looked like an alien species. "I am not delivering anything, son," Elijah said, tossing the keys to the stunned valet, who caught them with 2 fingers, as if they were contagious. "Unless you count a reality check. We are checking in. Name is Vance." The valet looked at the keys in his hand like they were radioactive sludge, then looked at the truck, then back at Elijah. I stepped out, smoothing the skirt of my simple sundress, trying to project a confidence I did not feel. We walked toward the massive double doors made of glass and wrought iron. The lobby smelled of expensive white tea and old money. The floors were marble polished to a mirror shine that reflected the crystal chandeliers overhead. It was quiet, the kind of hushed atmosphere where money whispers. As we approached the reception desk, a voice boomed across the lobby, shattering the peace. "Whoa, whoa, hold on. I think the gardener got lost." I froze. Brad was standing by the concierge desk, holding a tumbler of scotch, even though it was barely noon. He was wearing a navy blue suit that fit him like a second skin, and his hair was gelled to perfection. He walked toward us, a shark-like grin spreading across his face. He stopped a few feet away, looking Elijah up and down with exaggerated amusement. "Hey, buddy, the staff entrance is that way," Brad said, pointing a manicured finger toward a discreet door behind a potted palm. "Oh, wait. My bad. It is just my brother-in-law. Sorry, Elijah. I honestly thought someone called a plumber to fix the toilets. You really commit to the blue-collar aesthetic, do not you?" Elijah did not flinch. He adjusted his cap and looked Brad in the eye, his expression unreadable. "Nice to see you too, Brad." Elijah said, his voice calm and deep. "Just came from a site. Didn't have time to change into my tuxedo for check-in." Brad laughed, a sharp barking sound that drew the attention of several guests in the lobby. "A site, right? Digging another ditch. You know you could have at least hosed yourself off before coming into a place like this. You are going to get dirt on the marble." Before Elijah could respond, my father David appeared from the lounge area. He looked stressed, his forehead creased with worry as he rushed over. He did not hug me, he did not say hello. He looked straight at Elijah and frowned, his eyes darting to the expensive rug beneath Elijah's boots. "Elijah, for God's sake!" David hissed, looking around to see if anyone important was watching. "Could you stand back a little bit? You are standing too close to Brad." I blinked, confused. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "Look at him." "Maya," my father said, gesturing vaguely at my husband as if he were a pile of refuse. "He is covered in dust. Brad is wearing a bespoke Italian suit. It costs $5,000. If Elijah brushes against him, it will cost a fortune to dry clean." "Just give him some space, Elijah. We are trying to make a good impression here." A $5,000 suit. My father was worried about fabric while he insulted his son-in-law to his face. I looked at Elijah, expecting him to snap. I expected him to tell them that the watch on his wrist, hidden under his frayed cuff, cost more than Brad's suit and his car combined. But he did not. He just took a small step back, a faint, dangerous smile playing on his lips. "My apologies, David," Elijah said. "I would hate to devalue the merchandise." Brad snorted, taking a sip of his scotch. "Yeah. We'll try to keep a low profile this weekend." "Okay. I have business partners here. Serious people. They do not need to see the help wandering around the main lobby." I felt tears of rage pricking my eyes. "Brad, he is family," I said, my voice trembling. "He is an embarrassment," Brad corrected. "Look, just get checked in and try to stay out of the way until the rehearsal dinner. And maybe find a back door to use so you do not scare the guests." My father nodded in agreement. "Listen to Brad, honey. He knows how these things work. Just go get cleaned up. And Elijah maybe leave the truck round back next time. They turned and walked away back toward the bar, laughing about something Brad said. I stood there shaking. Elijah wrapped an arm around me, his touch warm and solid. It is okay, Maya, he whispered in my ear. Let them have their moment. The higher they climb, the harder they fall. And trust me, Brad is standing on a trap door he does not even know is there. 2 hours later, I was summoned to the bridal suite, like a servant being called to the Queen's chambers. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother that just said, "Come upstairs now, emergency." I left Elijah in our room, where he was ostensibly napping, but actually reviewing merger documents on his encrypted laptop, and hurried to the penthouse suite. I thought maybe something terrible had happened. Maybe Chloe was sick. Maybe there was a problem with the venue. For a fleeting, pathetic second, I even hoped they just wanted me there to share a moment of sisterly bonding before the rehearsal dinner. I pushed open the double doors into a room that smelled of hairspray and expensive perfume. It was chaos. Stylists were hovering over bridesmaids in matching silk robes, while a photographer snapped candid photos of everyone laughing and drinking champagne. Everyone except me, of course, because I was not a bridesmaid. Chloe was sitting in a high chair getting her makeup done, barking orders at a terrified assistant. When my mother saw me, she did not smile. She grabbed my arm with a grip that was surprisingly strong and pulled me toward the back of the room. "Thank God you are here," Sarah hissed. "We have a disaster. Jessica has food poisoning. She has been throwing up for an hour. She cannot stand up, let alone walk down the aisle." I felt a pang of sympathy for Jessica, but also a small spark of hope. Was my mother asking me to step in? Was I finally going to be part of the wedding party, after months of being told I would ruin the aesthetic? "I am sorry, Mom," I said. "Do you need me to help her?" "No, I need you to put this on," Sarah said, thrusting a garment bag into my chest. "You are the same size as Jessica, roughly. You need to fill in." My heart actually skipped a beat. For a moment I forgot the insults in the lobby. I forgot about the mud plates. I just wanted to be included. I took the bag into the bathroom and unzipped it. Inside was a dress, in the wedding's signature ice blue color. But as I pulled it out, my heart sank. It was not one of the designer gowns the other bridesmaids were wearing. The fabric felt cheaper, rougher against my skin. It looked like a sample or a reject from a discount rack. I put it on anyway. It was tight in the hips and loose in the bust, fitting me like a sack. As I turned to check the mirror, I saw it. A jagged tear along the side seam near my waist where the zipper had caught and ripped the fabric. White thread hung loose against the blue satin. It was damaged goods, just like me. I walked back out into the suite holding the tear closed with my hand. "Mom, this dress is ripped," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "And it does not fit. I cannot wear this in front of everyone." Chloe spun around in her chair, her eyes narrowing as she looked at me. She did not look concerned. She looked annoyed. "It does not matter, Maya," she said with a wave of her hand. "You are not going to be standing in the lineup. I am not having you in my official photos looking like that." I blinked, confused. "Then why am I wearing this?" "You are the train handler," Chloe said, as if it were obvious. "My veil is 20 feet long. It is heavy. I need someone to carry it while I walk down the aisle and then arrange it on the steps so it looks perfect for the video. Once I am at the altar, you just go stand in the back corner behind the floral arch. No one will even see you. That is why you are wearing the backup dress." We did not want to waste a good gown on someone who is basically going to be invisible. I stood there feeling the blood drain from my face. They did not want me as a sister or a bridesmaid. They wanted a prop, a human paperweight to make sure Chloe looked good for her Instagram followers. "Chloe, this is humiliating," I whispered. "You want me to wear a ripped dress and hide in the corner?" "Oh my God, stop making this about you," Sarah snapped, stepping between us. "Your sister is under enough stress. Jessica is sick. We need a body. You are a body. Just do it, Maya. It is the least you can do after bringing that hideous gift yesterday." "But the rip," I protested, pointing to my side. People will see my skin. Stand on your other side then, Chloe said, turning back to the mirror to check her lipstick. Just angle your body away from the camera. Besides, you will be in the shadows. Nobody is going to be looking at you anyway. Do not ruin my happy day with that gloomy face of yours. Just fix it and be ready in 10 minutes. She dismissed me again. My own mother turned away to pour more champagne for the real bridesmaids, laughing at a joke I was not part of. I stood alone in the middle of the room, wearing a torn dress that scratched my skin, fighting back tears for the second time that day. I wanted to rip the dress off. I wanted to throw it at them and storm out. But I thought of Elijah. I thought of his plan. I thought of the trap door Brad was standing on. I will do it, I said softly, to no one in particular. I retreated to the corner and found a safety pin in a sewing kit on the table. I pinned the jagged tear, closed the cold metal scraping against my ribs. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. I looked like what they thought I was. Cheap. Damaged. Secondary. But as I stared into my own eyes, I saw something else hardening there. A resolve that was colder than the ice-blue satin. I would play their game. I would hold her train. I would stand in the shadows. And when the spotlight finally turned to me and Elijah, I would make sure they saw exactly who they had been treating like dirt. I swallowed my tears, adjusted the pin, and walked back out, ready to serve the queen who was about to lose her crown. The pre-wedding cocktail party was held in the vineyard's manicured rose garden, an outdoor spectacle of wealth designed to impress. I stood by a sculpted hedge, clutching my train handler dress, and trying to disappear into the foliage just as I had been instructed. The safety pin was digging into my side, but I kept my back straight, my eyes scanning the crowd for Elijah. He was supposed to be here somewhere, but Brad had likely banished him to the parking lot. Around me, servers in black vests circulated with trays of truffle arancini and caviar blinis. I had not eaten since breakfast, but I did not dare take anything. I knew my mother would be watching, ready to criticize me for acting like a starving peasant. Brad was in his element, holding court near the fountain with a group of men in suits. I recognized one of them. It was Mr. Sterling, a senior partner at Horizon Capital. He was the key to the merger Brad was so desperate to close. I knew this because Elijah had mentioned him over dinner weeks ago, calling him a decent man with a blind spot for flashy salesmen. I watched as Brad laughed too loudly at Sterling jokes, his hand gripping the older man's shoulder with familiar arrogance. I took a step back, trying to give them space, but the heel of my shoe sank into the soft earth. I stumbled slightly, bumping into a small table that held an arrangement of white hydrangeas. The vase wobbled but did not fall. However, the movement caught Brad's attention. His head snapped toward me, his eyes narrowing. He excused himself from the group and strode over to me, his face a mask of fury. "What do you think you are doing?" he hissed, grabbing my arm hard enough to bruise. "I told you to stay out of sight." "I am sorry, Brad," I whispered, trying to pull away. "I just lost my balance." "You are hovering like a vulture." He spat his breath, smelling of expensive scotch. "Mr. Sterling is asking who the woman in the cheap dress is. Do you know how bad that looks for me?" "You smell like desperation and dirt, Maya. My investors do not want to be near someone who looks like they crawled out of a compost heap." I felt tears prick my eyes again. "I am your sister-in-law," I said, my voice trembling. "I am family." "You are a liability," he corrected, pushing me back toward the hedge. "Just get out of here. Go wait by the service entrance until the ceremony starts. I do not want to see your face again until you are holding Chloe Train." I stumbled back, my heart pounding. I turned to leave, wanting nothing more than to escape his cruelty, but Chloe appeared, blocking my path. She was holding a large glass of red wine, her eyes glittering with malice. She had seen the interaction. She had seen her husband manhandle me, and she was smiling. "Going somewhere, sis?" she asked, her voice sickly sweet. "Brad told me to leave," I said, looking at the ground. "Oh, but you cannot leave yet," she said, stepping closer. "We have not even had a toast." She raised her glass as if to salute me. But instead of drinking, she tilted her wrist. It happened in slow motion. The dark red liquid cascaded out of the glass, splashing onto my chest, my neck, my face. It soaked into the cheap blue satin, turning it a muddy purple. It dripped down my legs, staining my skin. I gasped, the cold wine shocking me. "Oops," Chloe said, covering her mouth with a feigned look of surprise. My hand slipped. "Oh my God, Maya, look at you. You are a mess." The chatter around us stopped. Everyone was looking. My mother was there instantly, not to help me, but to assess the damage to the scene. "Chloe, are you okay?" she asked, ignoring me completely. "Did she spill something on you?" "No, Mom. She's just clumsy," Chloe said loud enough for the investors to hear. "Poor Maya. She just cannot seem to handle herself in polite society." Brad laughed, a cruel barking sound. "Well, that solves one problem. She definitely cannot stay now. She looks like a crime scene." Chloe leaned in close, her voice dropping to a whisper only I could hear. "Honestly, Maya, this is an improvement. At least now you look like trash on the outside too. It suits you. You look better wet and dirty anyway. It is your natural state." She straightened up and snapped her fingers at a nearby security guard. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice ringing with authority. "This woman is disturbing the guests. She is intoxicated and making a scene. Can you please escort her out?" The guard, a large man with an earpiece, stepped forward. "Ma'am, you need to come with me," he said, his hand heavy on my shoulder. "But I am her sister," I protested, looking at my parents. "Dad, please." "My father." David looked at me, then looked at Brad and the investors. He turned his back. "Take her out," Chloe said, her voice cold. "Put her outside the main gate. She can dry off in the rain." The guard began to drag me away. I stumbled, my heels slipping on the grass, the wine sticky on my skin. I looked back one last time. Chloe was laughing with Brad, clinking her empty glass against his. My mother was apologizing to the guests for the disturbance. No one cared. No one helped. I was shoved out of the garden gate into the parking lot. The rain had started again, a light drizzle that mixed with the wine on my face. I stood there shivering, humiliated and alone. I looked at my phone. It was dead. I had no way to call Elijah. No way to escape. I sank onto a plastic chair near the valet stand, the same chair where I would later receive that final text from my mother. I wrapped my arms around myself, trying to hold the broken pieces of my dignity together. They thought they had won. They thought they had discarded me like refuse. But as I sat there in the rain, watching the warm glow of the party I had been thrown out of, I felt something shift inside me. The last thread of loyalty, the last hope for their love, snapped. I was done being the victim. I was done being the dirt beneath their feet. When Elijah arrived, when he saw me like this, he would unleash a storm that would wash them all away. And this time, I would not stop him. I would hand him the match. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the pristine gravel lot of the Silver Creek Resort into a slurry of expensive mud. Through the blur of the downpour, I saw headlights cut through the gloom. It was not the sleek xenon beam of a Mercedes or a Porsche like every other car in the lot. It was the yellow, slightly dim glow of a 2010 Ford F-150. Elijah. He pulled the truck into a spot next to a gleaming white Bentley, the engine giving its signature rattle before dying into silence. To anyone watching from the dry warmth of the valet stand, it looked like a service vehicle arriving to fix a leak or haul away trash. To me, it looked like a lifeboat in the middle of a storm. He stepped out, his work boots sinking deep into the muck without hesitation. He was wearing his site visit gear, a heavy canvas jacket over a flannel shirt, and his baseball cap pulled low against the biting wind. He scanned the area, probably looking for the service entrance, where Brad and my father had so graciously told him he belonged. Then he saw me. I was huddled on the white plastic chair, my arms wrapped around my wine-stained chest, shaking so hard my teeth clicked together audibly. I saw his body go rigid. His body, The easy loping stride of a husband coming to meet his wife vanished instantly, replaced by the stalking gait of a predator spotting a threat. He did not walk, he marched toward me, closing the distance in seconds, his eyes locked on my shivering form. Maya, he breathed, dropping to his knees in the mud right in front of me. He did not care about the wet ground soaking his jeans. He did not care about the dirt. His large warm hands cupped my face, wiping away a mixture of rain and red wine that streaked my skin. "What did they do to you?" His voice was not loud. It was a low rumble vibrating with a kind of fury I had never heard from him before. He saw the purple stains on my skin, the way the cheap satin dress clung to me like a second skin of humiliation. He pulled his hands back and looked at the red residue on his fingertips, then back at the tent where the silhouette of my sister holding a wineglass was visible against the light. He did not wait for an answer. He stood up and stripped off his heavy canvas jacket, the one that smelled like pine and rain and security. He wrapped it around my shoulders, pulling it tight to trap whatever body heat I had left. It was heavy and warm, and for the first time in hours, the violent shivering began to subside. But as the warmth returned, so did the reality of the situation. Elijah turned toward the tent, his jaw set so hard a muscle twitched in his cheek. "I am going in there," he said, his voice deadly calm. "I am going to tear that place apart until I find the person who did this to you." He took a step toward the entrance, his fists clenched at his sides. Panic flared in my chest. If he went in there swinging, if he caused a scene now, my parents would spin it. They would tell everyone he was a violent blue-collar brute who ruined Chloe's wedding. They would call the police. We would lose the moral high ground, we would lose everything. I reached out and grabbed his hand, pulling him back. His rough, calloused fingers were the only anchor I had left in this spinning world. "No, Elijah," I pleaded, my voice cracking. "Please do not. It is her wedding day. If you go in there screaming, they will just kick us out. They will win. Just take me home. Please let us just go." He looked down at me, conflict warring in his eyes. He hated seeing me weak. He hated seeing me accept their abuse, but he loved me enough to listen. He pulled me up from the chair, pulling me into his chest. I buried my face in his flannel shirt, sobbing quietly, the smell of him grounding me. He held me there in the rain for a long moment, his hand stroking my wet hair, while his eyes remained fixed on the party inside. "Okay," he said finally, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together. "We will play it your way for one more hour. But you need to trust me, Maya. Their fun ends tonight. I am not going to let them get away with treating you like an animal." He walked me to the passenger side of the truck and helped me inside, cranking the heat up to full blast. Then he paused. He did not get in the driver's side immediately. Instead, he reached into the glove box and pulled out a phone. It was not his personal phone, the one with the cracked screen he used for family calls. It was a sleek black satellite phone he kept for secure business dealings, the one he used when he was wearing the hat of a venture capitalist managing billions in assets. I watched him through the rain-slicked windshield. He stood by the hood of the truck, oblivious to the storm. He dialed a number and waited, his posture shifting. He wasn't the gardener anymore. He wasn't the poor husband. He was Elijah Vance, the man who could buy and sell this entire resort without blinking. "Bring the files," he said into the phone, his voice flat and commanding, cutting through the sound of the rain. "Yes, the acquisition papers for Brad Company. And get the legal team on standby. I want everything ready in 20 minutes. Meet me at the service entrance." He hung up and climbed into the driver's seat. The truck cab felt small and safe, a world away from the cruelty of the wedding. He looked at me, and a small, cold smile touched his lips, a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Dry your eyes, baby," he said, putting the truck in gear. "You are about to have the best seat in the house for the fireworks." The marquee doors slid open, and the sudden assault of warmth and music felt almost foreign after the cold solitude of the truck cab. I clung to Elijah's arm, my cheap train handler dress, now mostly dry, but stained with the dark, ugly splotches of red wine, a map of my earlier humiliation. Elijah had changed into a clean flannel shirt he kept in the back seat, but he was still undeniably himself, rugged, unpolished, and to the eyes of everyone in this room deeply out of place. The rehearsal dinner had moved from the cocktail hour into the main banquet hall, a cavernous space draped in white chiffon and illuminated by hundreds of floating candles. It was breathtakingly expensive, a perfect stage for Brad to showcase his success. As we stepped inside, a hush rippled through the nearest tables. Eyes darted to my stained dress, then to Elijah's boots, then away, accompanied by whispers behind manicured hands. I kept my head high, drawing strength from the solid warmth of my husband beside me. We scanned the room for our assigned seats. The head table was a masterpiece of floral design, elevated on a platform where my parents Chloe and Brad sat like royalty. The tables closest to them were filled with investors, business partners, and the wealthier members of Brad's family. We walked further back past the cousins, past the college friends, past even the distant relatives I hadn't seen in a decade. Finally, we found our place cards. We were at table 19, the very last table in the room, tucked into a dark corner directly next to the swinging doors of the kitchen and the restrooms. The table was smaller than the others, clearly an afterthought, and already occupied by 3 bored teenagers and a toddler in a high chair who was currently smashing avocado into the tablecloth. The kids' table. They had seated us at the kids' table. I felt a fresh wave of shame heat my cheeks. They weren't just hiding us, they were infantilizing us, telling us we didn't belong at the adults' table where the real business and real money were discussed. Elijah didn't even blink. He pulled out a chair for me, his movements deliberate and calm, ignoring the waiter, who bumped into him with a tray of dirty dishes. "Cozy," he murmured, sitting down next to me. "Best seat in the house for people watching." I tried to smile, but my lips felt stiff. "I'm sorry, Elijah. I shouldn't have made you come in here." "Don't be sorry," he said, his eyes scanning the room, landing on Brad, who was laughing raucously at the head table. "I'm exactly where I need to be." Just then, my mother Sarah swept by, trailing a scent of expensive perfume and disapproval. She stopped at our table not to greet us, but to inspect the setting as if checking for dust. She looked at my stained dress with a grimace, then turned her gaze to Elijah, her eyes flicking over his flannel shirt with undisguised contempt. "Well," she said, her voice pitched just loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I see you found your seats. Honestly, Maya, we didn't even think you'd come back in after the incident. But I suppose we couldn't leave you out in the rain. People might talk." "Thank you for your concern, Mom," I said, my voice flat. She ignored me, focusing her attention on Elijah. "And Elijah," she said, a saccharine smile plastering onto her face, "do try to mind your manners tonight. We have very important guests. A single plate at this dinner costs $300. That's probably more than you make in a week of digging holes, isn't it? So please eat slowly. Don't gorge yourself. We don't want people thinking you're starving." The insult was so casual, so practiced. She didn't even realize she was speaking to a man who could buy this entire venue with the change in his investment account. I waited for Elijah to retort to defend himself, but he just smiled. It was a slow, dangerous smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Thank you, Sarah," Elijah said, his voice smooth and polite. "That is very generous of you. $300 a plate. I will certainly remember the value of this meal. I promise to savor every bite." My mother sniffed, clearly missing the sarcasm. "Good. Just try to blend in, if that's even possible." She turned on her heel and walked away, back to the light and the laughter of the head table. I looked at Elijah, my hand finding his under the table. He squeezed my fingers, his gaze fixed on Brad, who was now standing up to make a toast, completely oblivious to the storm gathering in the corner of the room. $300, Elijah whispered to me, shaking his head. "They think that's power. They have no idea." The waiter dropped 2 plates of filet mignon in front of us, the meat perfectly seared, the presentation flawless. It looked delicious, but to me, it tasted like ash. I watched Elijah pick up his fork, his movements precise and controlled. He wasn't just eating dinner, he was biding his time. And as he cut into the steak, I realized he wasn't intimidated by the luxury or the insults. He was analyzing it, dissecting it, preparing to dismantle it piece by piece. The kids' table was about to become the command center for their destruction. The main course plates were cleared, replaced by delicate servings of lavender crème brûlée. But the atmosphere in the room shifted from dining to spectacle. The lights dimmed slightly and a spotlight cut through the gloom, illuminating the center stage where a crystal podium stood waiting. It was time for the speeches, the moment my family lived for public validation of their perceived success. My father David was the first to take the microphone. He adjusted his silk tie, his face flushed with wine and pride. He looked out at the sea of faces, his gaze lingering on the VIP tables before skipping entirely over the dark corner where Elijah and I sat. "Ladies and gentlemen," David began, his voice booming through the high-quality sound system, "tonight we are not just celebrating a marriage, we are celebrating a union of excellence. When Chloe brought Brad home, I knew he was special. Not just because he drives a better car than I do." He paused for laughter, which came dutifully from the front rows, "but because he has vision." He gestured toward Brad, who was leaning back in his chair with the relaxed arrogance of a man who believes he has already won the game. "Brad isn't just a groom tonight," my father continued, his voice swelling with importance. "He is a conqueror. As many of you know, Brad has been working tirelessly on a merger that will reshape the tech landscape. Just this afternoon, he finalized the preliminary terms with Horizon Capital. For those who don't follow the markets, Horizon is the premier venture capital firm on the West Coast." A murmur of appreciation rippled through the room. I saw Mr. Sterling, the investor Brad had been fawning over earlier, nod in acknowledgement. "This deal," David said, leaning into the microphone for emphasis, "is going to value Brad's company at $50 million. And Brad's personal stake, well, let's just say my future son-in-law will be worth $10 million by the time he wakes up tomorrow morning." The room erupted in applause. People whistled. Glasses were raised. My mother dabbed at her eyes, beaming as if she had personally printed the money herself. Chloe looked at Brad with adoration that seemed directly proportional to the numbers being announced. $10 million, David repeated, savoring the words. "That is the kind of security every father wants for his daughter. Brad, welcome to the family. You are the son I always hoped for." The insult to Elijah was unspoken, but deafening. The son I always hoped for. Not the son who fixed your deck for free last summer. Not the son who loves your daughter unconditionally. The son with the $10 million. Under the table, Elijah's hand tightened around mine. I looked at him expecting to see anger, hurt, or at least annoyance. Instead, he was watching my father with a calm, almost clinical detachment, like a scientist observing a particularly interesting specimen of mold. He leaned in close to my ear, his voice a low rumble that was audible only to me beneath the applause. $10 million, Elijah whispered. "That's an interesting valuation. Considering the term sheet I drafted last week valued the company at 12, pending a forensic audit." I froze, turning to look at him. His face was impassive, but his eyes were sharp, glittering with intelligence. "What?" I whispered back. "Horizon Capital." He murmured, his gaze never leaving Brad's smug face. "That's my firm, Maya. I founded it 6 years ago. The site visits I go on, I'm not digging holes, I'm evaluating assets for acquisition." My breath hitched. Horizon Capital. The name had been floating around the wedding all weekend, spoken in hushed, reverent tones by Brad and his associates. It was the Titan, the kingmaker. And my husband, my flannel-wearing, truck-driving husband, was the king. "But you drive a truck," I stammered, my mind struggling to reconcile the two realities. "I like the truck," he said simply. "And I like knowing who people really are. Money changes how people treat you. I wanted to be sure you loved me, not the portfolio." He looked at me then, and the love in his eyes was so fierce it made my chest ache. "I do," I whispered. "I love you." "I know," he said softly. And that's why I haven't signed the deal yet. He nodded toward the stage where Brad was now standing up to accept the applause, shaking hands, and looking for all the world like a man who had conquered the universe. Brad thinks he closed the deal with a junior partner this afternoon, Elijah explained, his voice dropping lower. He thinks it's a done deal. He doesn't know that every contract Horizon issues has a final approval clause. A clause that requires the signature of the managing partner. Me. I looked back at Brad, who was now raising a glass of champagne, basking in the adoration of my parents. He looked invincible. He looked rich. He looked like he owned the world. He doesn't have the money, I asked, the realization slowly dawning on me. He has debt, Elijah corrected. He leveraged everything he owns against this deal. The house, the car, probably this wedding. He's counting on that 10 million payout to cover his tracks. Without my signature, he's not worth 10 million. He's bankrupt. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't from the cold. It was the thrill of sudden, absolute power. My family had spent years mocking Elijah for his poverty. They had treated him like a servant, a joke, a stain on their perfect image. And all this time, he had been holding the keys to their entire kingdom. So, I whispered, a slow smile spreading across my face for the first time in 2 days. He's celebrating a check that hasn't cleared. He's celebrating a check, Elijah said, his eyes narrowing as Brad began to speak, that I am about to tear up. The applause died down as Brad tapped the microphone, ready to give his speech. He looked directly at our table, his eyes locking on Elijah with a sneer of triumph. He thought he had won. He thought he was the alpha. He had no idea that the predator in the room wasn't the man in the $5,000 suit. It was the man in the flannel shirt, quietly eating his $300 dinner and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Elijah excused himself from the table, leaving me with the lingering taste of lavender creme brulee and the burning knowledge that my husband was the most powerful man in the room. He walked toward the restrooms, his boots making a heavy, deliberate sound on the marble floor that seemed to annoy the staff, but he moved with a confidence that made them step out of his way. The men's room at the Silver Creek Resort was a temple to excess, with black marble walls, gold-plated faucets, and an attendance station that was currently empty, likely because the attendant had been dispatched to fetch more towels for the guests who had been caught in the rain. Elijah stepped up to the sink and turned on the water, watching his own reflection in the gilt-framed mirror. He looked calm, but his eyes were dark, turbulent pools. He was washing the grit of the construction site from his hands when the heavy oak door swung open and slammed against the wall. Brad stumbled in, bringing a cloud of expensive cologne and scotch with him. He did not even look around to see if anyone else was there. To men like Brad, people who wore flannel and drove trucks were just furniture, part of the background scenery designed to serve him. He walked straight to the urinal, unzipped his fly with one hand, and pulled his phone out with the other, dialing a number on speakerphone, because of course he did. "Yo, Mike, are you there?" Brad shouted, his voice echoing off the marble tiles. "Yeah, I am at the reception now. It is going great. They are eating out of the palm of my hand." Elijah turned off the faucet silently. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, tapping the screen to open the voice memo app. He did not hide. He stood right there, leaning against the black marble sink, drying his hands with a cloth towel, while the red recording light pulsed silently. "Yeah, the old man David bought it, hook, line, and sinker." Brad laughed, a wet, ugly sound. "He thinks I am sitting on 10 million liquid. He has no idea I had to put the lease for the Bentley on a business credit card that is maxed out. If this merger does not go through by Monday, I am underwater." There was a pause as Mike spoke on the other end, asking something about the buyer. "Horizon Capital." Brad scoffed. "Yeah, I met with the junior associates. They are sharp. But the guy at the top, the managing partner, Elijah Vance, I heard he is some reclusive trust fund baby. Probably inherited the firm from his daddy and spends his days on a yacht somewhere. He would not know a balance sheet if it hit him in the face. I cooked the Q3 projections, Mike. I inflated the user base by 40%. By the time he figures it out, I will have my golden parachute and be halfway to the Caymans. Elijah's eyes narrowed. He looked at his own reflection, then at Brad's back. This was it. This was not just arrogance, it was fraud. It was a confession to a felony delivered between bathroom breaks. And the girl, Mike asked, his voice tinny through the speaker. Chloe. Brad sighed. She is fine for now. She looks good in photos and she keeps her mouth shut mostly. But once the money hits the account, I am done. I give it 6 months tops. I am not splitting 8 figures with a woman who thinks bone china is a personality trait. I will cut her loose, claiming irreconcilable differences, maybe throw her a few grand to keep quiet. Elijah's grip on the towel tightened until his knuckles turned white. He had suspected Brad was using Chloe, but hearing it laid out with such casual cruelty was different. What about the sister? Mike asked. The one you were complaining about. Maya. Brad snorted. Oh God, do not even get me started. She is pathetic. I literally locked her outside in the rain like a wet dog, and she is still here eating the dinner. I told her she smelled and she just took it. That whole family is weak, Mike. They are desperate for status. That is why they love me. They need me to validate them. I own them. Brad flushed the toilet and turned around, still talking, zipping up his pants with his free hand. He stopped dead when he saw Elijah. For a second there was a flicker of fear in his eyes, a primal recognition that he was in a cage with something dangerous. But then the alcohol and the arrogance took over. He saw the flannel. He saw the work boots. And he relaxed. Oh, it is you, Brad sneered, not even bothering to hang up the phone. I did not know they let the staff use the guest restrooms. You better hurry up, ditch digger. I think I saw a toilet clogged in stall 3. That is more your speed, right? Elijah stopped recording. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, calm and deliberate. He folded the cloth towel and placed it gently on the counter. He took one step toward Brad, invading his personal space with a looming physical presence that made Brad shrink back against the marble wall. Elijah was 3 inches taller, and built from years of physical labor, not gym memberships. I would be careful, Brad, Elijah said, his voice low and smooth like velvet over steel. Brad blinked, trying to regain his composure. Excuse me. Elijah reached out and patted Brad on the shoulder, a heavy, patronizing tap that was a mirror image of how Brad had treated him in the lobby. I said be careful. Elijah repeated, his eyes locking onto Brad's with a terrifying intensity. You talk a lot for a man who is standing on quicksand. And by the way, you should really wash your hands. You are filthy. Elijah turned and walked out of the restroom, leaving Brad standing there with his mouth open, the phone still clutching in his unwashed hand. As the heavy door closed behind him, Elijah exhaled slowly. He had the smoking gun. He had the confession. He had the fraud. Now he just needed the delivery system. He pulled out his phone again and sent the audio file to his legal team with a simple caption, Execute Order 66. Then he texted his assistant, who was waiting in the Rolls-Royce parked just out of sight. Bring the briefcase. It is time. The sun had disappeared below the Napa horizon, leaving the vineyard bathed in twilight. Inside the marquee, the party was reaching a fever pitch of self-congratulatory excess. Brad was back at the head table laughing too loudly, while my parents beamed at him like he was a deity. I sat alone at the kids' table watching them picking at a bread roll and wondering where Elijah had gone. He had been gone for nearly 20 minutes, and a cold knot of anxiety was starting to form in my stomach. Had he left? Had he finally decided that my family was too much even for him? Outside the main entrance, the air was thick with the smell of rain and expensive cologne. A sleek black Rolls-Royce Phantom pulled up silently, gliding over the wet gravel like a shadow. It parked directly in front of the doors, ignoring the valet who rushed forward. The back door opened and a man stepped out. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored Italian suit that cost more than my entire wedding budget. He carried a slim black leather briefcase with silver clasps. This was Marcus, Elijah's executive assistant and right-hand man. He looked out of place among the rented limousines and drunk wedding guests like a shark swimming in a koi pond. Elijah emerged from the shadows near the service entrance, still wearing his flannel shirt and jeans, but carrying himself with a new weight. He walked toward Marcus, his stride long and purposeful. A security guard, the same one who had dragged me out earlier, stepped into Elijah's path, his hand resting on his belt. "Hey, you cannot be here," the guard barked, puffing out his chest. "Service entrance is around back, and you certainly cannot approach the VIP guests." Elijah did not slow down. He did not even look at the guard. He simply reached into his back pocket and pulled out a sleek black card with a gold microchip embedded in the center. It was not a credit card. It was a Horizon Capital Black Access card issued only to board members and managing partners. It granted unrestricted access to any property owned or managed by the firm globally. And since Elijah had quietly acquired a majority stake in the Silver Creek Resort chain 3 days ago, this was his property. He held the card up. The guard glanced at it and his face drained of color. He recognized the logo. He recognized the authority. He stepped back so fast he nearly tripped over a potted plant, stammering an apology that Elijah ignored completely. Marcus met Elijah at the base of the stairs. He did not say a word. He simply handed over the briefcase. The exchange was swift, seamless, and practiced. It was the transfer of a weapon. Elijah took the case, feeling the weight of Brad's future in his hand. "Thanks, Marcus," he said quietly. "Keep the engine running. We will not be staying long." Marcus nodded and got back into the car. Elijah turned and walked up the stairs past the terrified guard and back into the warmth of the marquee. He moved through the crowd like a ghost, the briefcase swinging slightly at his side. He returned to our table, where I was waiting, my hands twisted in my lap. He sat down and placed the black leather case on the white tablecloth, pushing aside the half-eaten plates of food. It looked ominous sitting there amidst the crystal and the flowers, a dark monolith in a sea of pastel frivolity. I looked at him, his face set in grim determination. "Where did you go?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "And what is that?" Elijah rested his hand on the cool leather. He looked at me, his eyes softening for the first time in hours. "It is the end, Maya. It is the end of the lies. It is the end of the bullying." I stared at the case, feeling a shiver run down my spine. "What is inside?" Elijah clicked the latches open, but did not lift the lid. He leaned in close, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in my chest. "Termination papers," he said. "A forensic audit of Brad Company, and a restraining order for your sister if she ever tries to touch you again." He looked toward the head table where Brad was standing up again, tapping his glass for another round of toasts. "It is justice," Elijah said, closing the latches with a sharp final click. "And it is about to be served." The sun rose over Napa Valley, burning off the storm clouds from the previous night and bathing the vineyard in a golden light that felt almost artificial in its perfection. It was the kind of morning wedding magazines exist to capture. The ceremony was set in the great hall, a cathedral of glass and steel overlooking the rolling hills. White orchids cascaded from the ceiling in waterfalls that cost more than my annual salary. A string quartet played Debussy in the corner, their bows moving in perfect synchronization. Every chair was draped in silk, every surface polished to a blinding gleam. It was a masterpiece of consumption, a shrine to the $50 million lifestyle my sister believed she had secured. I stood near the entrance of the aisle, holding the train of Chloe's gown, just as I had been ordered. My hands were shaking slightly, not from cold this time, but from the adrenaline coursing through my veins. Elijah was seated in the back row near the exit, his briefcase resting on his knees like a loaded weapon. He caught my eye and gave a barely perceptible nod. It was time. The music swelled, a dramatic crescendo that signaled the bride's entrance. The heavy oak doors swung open, and there she was. Chloe looked breathtaking. I had to give her that. Her dress was a cloud of lace and crystals fitted to perfection. Her hair was a work of art, her makeup flawless. She looked like a princess in a fairy tale. But as she turned to look at me, the illusion shattered. Her eyes were cold, hard flint. She did not see a sister. She saw a servant, a prop, dirt. She signaled for me to lift the heavy lace train. I bent down my fingers, brushing the expensive fabric. As I straightened up, she leaned in close, her face inches from mine. To the guests, it probably looked like a tender moment between sisters, a bride sharing a final whisper of excitement. But I saw the sneer curling her lip. "Do you see this, Maya?" She whispered, her voice a hiss of pure venom. "Take a good look. This is class. This is power. This is a world you will never touch because you are too busy playing in the mud with your loser husband." She paused, letting the insult sink in her eyes, darting to Elijah in the back row, then returning to me with a look of supreme triumph. "After today, you are done," she continued, her voice dropping lower. "Do not think you are coming to my house for Christmas. Do not think you are coming for holidays. You are not stepping 1 foot inside my mansion unless you are on your knees cleaning my shoes. That is the only way dirt gets into my house. Do you understand me?" I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear behind the arrogance, the insecurity that drove her to cruelty. She thought she was ascending to a throne, but she was walking onto a trap door. I felt a strange sense of pity mix with my anger. She had sold her soul for a check that was about to bounce. I smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had given her in years. It wasn't the smile of a defeated sister, it was the smile of the executioner. "Congratulations, Chloe," I said, my voice soft and steady. "You look exactly like the person you are. Enjoy this moment. Really soak it in, because it is the last one you are going to get." Confusion flickered in her eyes for a split second, but she shook it off. She laughed, a short, sharp sound of dismissal. "You are pathetic," she sneered. "Just hold the dress and try not to ruin my pictures." She turned away from me, facing the altar where Brad was waiting. He stood there looking every inch the corporate conqueror, his chest puffed out, his $5,000 suit gleaming under the lights. He winked at her, a gesture of shared victory. My parents were in the front row, wiping away tears of joy, oblivious to the rot at the center of their perfect tableau. I lifted the train, and the procession began. I walked behind her, invisible to the cameras, invisible to the guests, just a shadow trailing the star. But as we moved down the aisle, step by slow step, I felt the weight of Elijah's gaze on us. I knew what was in that briefcase. I knew that every step Chloe took toward the altar was a step closer to her own destruction. She thought she was walking toward a fortune. She had no idea she was walking off a cliff. The officiant, a man with a sonorous voice that seemed rented for the occasion, began to speak about love and commitment. I stood off to the side just behind the floral arch, trying to make myself as small as possible while still fulfilling my duty as the human veil weight. My parents were in the front row, dabbing their eyes. My mother looked at Brad with the same adoration she usually reserved for expensive jewelry. To them, this wasn't just a wedding, it was a coronation. They were marrying into money, into status, into the safety they had always craved. I looked at Elijah in the back row. He was sitting perfectly still, his hands resting on the black briefcase. He didn't look like a gardener anymore. In the dim light of the hall, with his jaw set and his eyes focused, he looked like a judge waiting to deliver a sentence. The officiant reached the part of the ceremony that always makes people hold their breath. "If anyone here present knows of any just cause why this couple should not be joined in holy matrimony, speak now or forever hold your peace." The silence that followed was heavy. I looked at the floor, fighting the urge to scream everything I knew. I wanted to shout about the insults, the cruelty, the fraud. But I stayed silent. I knew the plan. The silence stretched out for a beat too long, then the officiant nodded and turned to Brad. "Do you, Brad, take Chloe to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Brad opened his mouth to answer, his face arranging itself into a practiced expression of devotion. But before he could get the words out, a sound tore through the quiet sanctuary. It wasn't a cough or a sneeze. It was a digital alarm, loud and insistent, blaring from the inside pocket of Brad's jacket. It was the specific ringtone he had set for urgent business notifications, a sound that demanded immediate attention. The guests shifted in their seats. My mother looked horrified, her eyes darting around as if searching for someone to blame. Brad patted his chest, his smile faltering for a fraction of a second before he recovered. He pulled the phone out, the screen lighting up his face. He didn't look embarrassed. He looked smug. He tapped the screen to silence it and shoved it back into his pocket with a chuckle that echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "Sorry, folks," he said, addressing the congregation with a wink. "That is probably just the bank notification. Big merger went through this morning. Guess they wanted to congratulate me on the wire transfer hitting the account. Even my phone knows I am about to be a very rich man." A ripple of polite laughter went through the crowd. Of course. Brad was so successful, even his interruptions were about making money. My father nodded approvingly, clearly thinking this was a power move. But the laughter died instantly when a voice cut through the air from the back of the room. It wasn't loud, but it carried with a terrifying clarity that froze everyone in place. "Actually, Brad, that is not a deposit notification." Elijah stood up. He rose slowly, unfurling his height until he seemed to loom over the entire assembly. He picked up the black briefcase and stepped into the center aisle. The sound of his heavy boots on the stone floor was the only thing audible in the stunned silence. "That is a security alert from the bank." Elijah continued, his voice steady and cold. "It is notifying you that your personal and business accounts have just been frozen for investigation of fraud." Brad squinted into the dim light, trying to make out who had spoken. When he recognized Elijah, his face twisted into a sneer. "Sit down, ditch digger," he barked. "This is a private ceremony. Security, get this clown out of here." But the security guards didn't move. They were looking at Elijah, who was walking toward the altar with the inevitability of a coming storm. Every head in the room swiveled toward Elijah as he walked down the aisle, not with the humble shuffle of a gardener, but with the predatory grace of a man who owned the very ground beneath his feet. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thud of his boots on the stone floor. Brad, standing at the altar, let out a laugh that sounded more like a bark of disbelief. He looked at the security guards, then at the guests, spreading his arms wide in a gesture of mock exasperation. "Is this guy serious?" Brad sneered, pointing a finger at Elijah. "He is clearly drunk. Someone get the gardener out of here before he hurts himself. Where is security? Do I have to do everything myself?" But the security guards remained frozen, their eyes fixed on Elijah with a look of dawning recognition and fear. They had seen the black access card. They knew who signed their checks. Elijah ignored Brad completely. He walked straight past the trembling officiant, past my parents who were staring at him with open mouths, and stepped up onto the raised platform of the altar. He stood toe to toe with Brad, towering over him, not just in height, but in presence. He reached into the pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out a small silver case. With a flick of his thumb, he opened it and tossed a handful of thick cream-colored business cards onto the small table where the Unity candle was flickering. They scattered across the white cloth landing face up. Brad looked down at the cards, his smirk faltering for the first time. He picked one up, his eyes scanning the embossed text. I saw the color drain from his face instantly, leaving him pale and sweating. "You asked for the buyer," Brad, Elijah said, his voice projecting to the back of the room without a microphone. "You spent all night bragging about closing the deal with Horizon Capital. You called the new owner a reclusive trust fund baby, a gunguktuke, a ngok." Elijah leaned in close, his eyes burning with cold fire. "Well, Brad, I am Elijah Vance, chairman of the board and majority shareholder of Horizon Capital, and I am the gay ngok you have been insulting for the last 48 hours. A gasp rippled through the congregation. In the front rows, the VIP guests, the investors and business partners Brad had been courting all weekend, began to murmur. I saw Mr. Sterling, the senior partner who had been laughing at Elijah earlier, stand up slowly. He squinted at the stage, then his eyes went wide. He adjusted his glasses and looked again. "My God," Sterling whispered loud enough for the first 3 rows to hear. "It is him. That is Vance. The Vance." One by one, the men in expensive suits stood up. They did not look at Brad. They looked at Elijah, the man in the flannel shirt and jeans. And then, in a wave of terrifying deference, they began to bow their heads slightly in acknowledgement. It was a silent salute to power, a recognition that the hierarchy of the room had just been violently inverted. My father David looked around in panic, seeing the respect being paid to the son-in-law he had called a loser. Elijah turned to the crowd, his gaze sweeping over my parents, over the investors, over everyone who had laughed at me. "You all thought I was digging ditches," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "I was digging into your financials, Brad, and what I found was not a $10 million company. I found a house of cards built on fraud, embezzlement, and lies." Brad tried to speak, but only a strangled squeak came out. He looked at the business card in his hand as if it were a grenade. "No," he stammered, backing away, until he bumped into the floral arch. "That is impossible. You drive a truck. You wear flannel. You are nobody." Elijah smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. "I drive a truck because I like it," he said. "I wear flannel because I do not need a $5,000 suit to know who I am. But you, Brad, you needed all of this. The venue, the car, the trophy wife. You needed it to hide the fact that you are empty. And now everyone knows." He picked up the black briefcase from where he had set it down and clicked the latches open. The sound echoed like a gunshot in the silent room. "I suggest you sit down, Brad," Elijah said, pulling out a stack of documents. "We have a lot of business to discuss. And this time, you are going to listen." Elijah did not stop with the business cards. He reached into the breast pocket of his flannel shirt and pulled out his black satellite phone, the same one he had used to record Brad's confession in the restroom just 24 hours earlier. He moved with a deliberate, terrifying slowness that commanded the attention of every single person in the room. He stepped over to the audio console that was set up next to the officiant stand and unplugged the microphone cable. The feedback screeched for a second, causing the guests to wince, but nobody moved to stop him. Not the officiant, who was trembling in his vestments, and certainly not Brad, who looked like he was watching his own execution in slow motion. Elijah plugged the cable into his phone and tapped the screen. "I think there is one more thing we need to clarify before we proceed," Elijah said, his voice no longer amplified, but carrying clearly in the dead silence of the hall. "You mentioned earlier that your investors were impressed by you, Brad. You mentioned that you own this family. Let us hear what you really think about them." He pressed play. The sound of the restroom door slamming echoed through the high-quality speakers, followed by the unmistakable sound of a zipper, and Brad's voice, loud and clear, booming through the cathedral-like ceiling. "Yo, Mike, are you there? Yeah, I am at the reception now. It is going great. They are eating out of the palm of my hand." A collective gasp went through the room. My mother, Sarah, put a hand to her chest, her eyes widening as she recognized the voice. It was Brad, but not the charming, polished Brad she adored. It was the crude, arrogant Brad I had met in the rain. The recording continued, every word sharp and damning. "Yeah, the old man. David bought it, hook, line, and sinker. He thinks I am sitting on 10 million liquid. He has no idea I had to put the lease for the Bentley on a business credit card that is maxed out. If this merger does not go through by Monday, I am underwater." I looked at my father. David's face had gone the color of ash. He slumped in his front row seat, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The man he had idolized, the son he had always wanted, was calling him a fool to his face in front of everyone he wanted to impress. But the recording was not done. It was just getting started. And the girl Chloe Brad voice sneered through the speakers. "She is fine for now. She looks good in photos, and she keeps her mouth shut mostly. But once the money hits the account, I am done. I give it 6 months tops. I am not splitting 8 figures with a woman who thinks bone china is a personality trait. I will cut her loose, claiming irreconcilable differences, maybe throw her a few grand to keep quiet. Chloe let out a sound that was half sob and half scream. She took a step back from the altar, her hands flying to her mouth. The bouquet of white orchids dropped from her fingers, hitting the floor with a soft thud. She looked at Brad with a mixture of horror and betrayal that would have been heartbreaking if she had not spent the last 2 days treating me like garbage. She had sold everything, her dignity, her sister, her integrity, for a man who planned to discard her like a used napkin. "Turn it off!" Brad screamed, his face turning a violent shade of purple. He looked frantically at the guests, at the investors who were now staring at him with open disgust. "That is fake. He used AI. That is a deep fake." But Elijah did not turn it off. He let it play. He let the recording run to the part that mattered most to him. "What about the sister?" Mike voice asked, tinny but audible. Maya Brad voice boomed, filled with laughter. "Oh God, do not even get me started. She is pathetic. I literally locked her outside in the rain like a wet dog, and she is still here eating the dinner. I told her she smelled and she just took it. That whole family is weak, Mike. They are desperate for status. That is why they love me. They need me to validate them. I own them." The recording ended with the sound of a toilet flushing. The symbolism was not lost on anyone. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Every investor, every family member, every friend turned their eyes to Brad. He stood there stripped of his lies, naked in his greed and cruelty. "You bastard," my father roared, standing up, his fists clenching. "You lied to us," Brad snapped. The veneer of the successful businessman cracked and fell away, leaving only a cornered animal. He did not apologize. He did not beg. He attacked. With a roar of pure rage, he lunged toward Elijah, his hands reaching for the phone, for the briefcase, for anything he could destroy. "I will kill you!" he shrieked, spittle flying from his mouth. "You ruined everything!" He cleared the distance in 2 strides, his hands outstretched toward Elijah's throat. But he never made it. Before he could even touch the flannel shirt, 2 shadows materialized from the side of the stage. They were massive men in dark suits, members of Elijah's private security detail who had entered with Marcus. They moved with a speed and efficiency that was terrifying to watch. One guard caught Brad's arm, twisting it behind his back with a sickening pop, while the other kicked his legs out from under him. Brad hit the stone floor hard, his face smashing into the white runner he had forbidden me to walk on. The wind was knocked out of him with a grunt. He struggled, kicking and screaming obscenities, but the guards pinned him down effortlessly, holding him there like a rebellious child. Elijah did not flinch. He did not even take a step back. He simply looked down at the man writhing at his feet, his expression one of utter indifference. He disconnected his phone and placed it back in his pocket, then looked out at the stunned crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen," Elijah said calmly, adjusting his cuffs. "I apologize for the interruption, but I believe we have seen enough of the groom's character. Now, if you will excuse me, I have some paperwork to file." Elijah stood over Brad like a monolith, unmovable and terrifyingly calm. The silence in the hall was so profound you could hear the soft whir of the air conditioning. Brad was still pinned to the floor by the security guards, his face pressed against the white runner, his expensive suit twisted and dusty. He stopped struggling, realizing the futility of it, and looked up at Elijah with eyes full of hate and fear. Elijah didn't even blink. He reached down and picked up the black briefcase, clicking the latches open with a sound that echoed like a gavel strike. He pulled out a thick document bound in a blue folder. He held it up so everyone could see the Horizon Capital logo embossed in silver on the cover. "This," Elijah said, his voice projecting clearly without a microphone, "is the preliminary merger agreement you were so excited about, Brad. The one you signed yesterday with my junior partner." He flipped the document open to a specific page marked with a red tab. "You were so busy counting your millions that you didn't read the fine print, did you? Specifically Clause 14 Section B regarding executive conduct and ethical liability. It states clearly that Horizon Capital reserves the right to terminate any executive officer immediately and without severance for acts of fraud, misrepresentation, or conduct detrimental to the company's reputation. Elijah looked down at Brad, his expression devoid of pity. Cooking your books to inflate valuation by 40% is fraud, Brad. Bragging about it in a public restroom while insulting the acquiring partner is conduct detrimental to the company. And treating my wife like garbage, well, that is just a personal bonus reason. He dropped the document onto Brad's chest. It landed with a soft thud. You are fired, Brad. Effective immediately. The merger is still happening, because your company has some valuable intellectual property, but you will not be part of it. You will not receive a golden parachute. You will not receive a single share of stock. You are walking away with nothing but the debt you accrued trying to impress people who do not even like you. A collective gasp went through the room. Mr. Sterling, the investor, stood up and began whispering urgently to his colleagues. They were already distancing themselves physically, moving away from the aisle, as if Brad were contagious. But Elijah wasn't done. He turned to Marcus, who was standing quietly by the side of the stage, holding a second thinner folder. Marcus, the assets, please, Elijah said. Marcus stepped forward and handed Elijah a set of keys. They were sleek, modern keys with the Porsche crest on the fob. You mentioned your Bentley earlier, Elijah said, looking back down at Brad. The one you leased on the company card. Well, since you are no longer an employee of the company, and since that card is now frozen, the vehicle is being repossessed. He tossed the keys to one of the security guards. Locate the vehicle in the parking lot and have it towed to the impound lot. And while you are at it, check the trunk. I have a feeling we might find some more company property he tried to liberate. Brad let out a strangled noise, a mix of a sob and a growl. My car, he choked out. You cannot take my car. I just did, Elijah said simply. And the apartment in the city, the one the company pays for. The locks are being changed as we speak. Your personal effects will be boxed and left on the curb. I suggest you find a friend with a couch, Brad, because you are officially homeless. My mother Sarah let out a low moan and collapsed into her chair, fanning herself frantically. The dream was dead. The $10 million, the luxury cars, the access to high society, it had all evaporated in less than 5 minutes. Elijah looked out at the crowd, his eyes landing on my parents. You wanted a son-in-law with money, he said, his voice cold. You wanted status. Well, you picked a man who built a castle on a swamp, and now you get to watch it sink. He turned back to me, his expression softening instantly. He held out his hand. Out. Maya, let us go. We have better things to do than watch the garbage get taken out. I stood up, my legs shaking, but my heart soaring. I walked down the aisle toward him, past the stunned faces of my family, past the investors who wouldn't meet my eyes, past Chloe, who was still staring at the empty space where her future used to be. I took Elijah's hand, feeling the calluses against my skin. He pulled me close, wrapping an arm around my waist. Wait! Brad screamed from the floor, struggling against the guards. You cannot leave me like this. I will sue you. I will ruin you. Elijah paused and looked back over his shoulder. You can try, Brad, he said with a dark smile. But lawyers cost money. And you do not have any. He signaled the guards to release him. They stepped back, leaving Brad lying in a heap on the floor, a broken man in a ruined suit. Elijah turned back to me, and together we walked out of the hall, leaving the wreckage of my sister's wedding behind us. The silence that Elijah left behind did not last long. It shattered like a crystal goblet dropped on stone, instantly replaced by a cacophony of panicked whispers and scraping chairs. I watched from the back of the aisle as the wedding of the century disintegrated into a chaotic free-for-all. Mr. Sterling, the senior partner Brad had been trying to impress, was the first to move. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with a look of absolute revulsion. He did not look at Brad, who was still picking himself up off the floor. He looked at his watch, then at his colleagues. Let us go, he said, his voice cutting through the murmur. I will not be associated with a fraud investigation. Delete every photo you took tonight. We were never here. The investors fled like rats sensing a sinking ship. They streamed out of the exits, ignoring my father's desperate attempts to stop them. David was running after them, his hands outstretched, pleading. "Wait, please, it is just a misunderstanding," he begged, grabbing Sterling's sleeve. "Brad can explain, it is just a corporate mix-up." Sterling shook him off like he was a beggar. "There is no mix-up, David," he said, cold and final. "Your son-in-law is a criminal. And frankly, your judgment and character is pathetic. Do not call my office again." As the VIP guests vanished, the venue staff moved in. The manager, a stern man in a tuxedo who had been obsequious all weekend, tapped furiously on a tablet. He walked up to Brad, who was dusting off his ruined suit, and cleared his throat. "Mr. Sterling," the manager said, his voice devoid of its former warmth. "We have a problem. The credit card on file for the remaining balance of the reception has just been declined. We attempted to run the backup card, and that was declined as well. The transaction was flagged as unauthorized use of corporate funds." Brad's face went from pale to gray. "Try it again," he snapped, his voice cracking. "It is a glitch." "I have plenty of money. I have tried it 3 times, sir," the manager said, signaling to the head waiter. "Per our contract, if payment is not secured prior to the reception, service cannot continue." He snapped his fingers. Immediately, the army of waiters who had been standing by with trays of lobster and champagne turned around. They did not serve the guests. They began clearing the tables. I watched with grim satisfaction as bottles of vintage wine were corked and carried away. The string quartet stopped playing mid-measure and began packing up their instruments. The lights were brought up to full brightness, stripping the room of its romantic ambiance and revealing the stark, ugly reality of the situation. That was the moment Chloe broke. She stood alone at the altar, her veil torn where she had stepped on it, her perfect day dissolving around her. The reality of her situation hit her with the force of a physical blow. There was no $10 million, there was no penthouse, there was no status. There was just debt and humiliation. "You liar!" she screamed, the sound tearing from her throat like a wounded animal. She launched herself at Brad, her fists flying. "You told me you had the money. You told me we were set for life." She hammered her fists against his chest, destroying what was left of his boutonnieres. "I signed the prenup because you said it protected me," she shrieked, tears streaming down her face, ruining her makeup. "You said you had $10 million coming tomorrow. Where is it, Brad? Where is my money?" Brad shoved her away hard enough that she stumbled back and nearly fell over the train I was no longer holding. "Get off me, you gold-digging leech!" he roared, his face twisted into a mask of pure ugliness. "It is not my fault," Brad yelled, pointing a shaking finger at the back of the room where Elijah and I were standing. "It is them. It is your dirt sister and her husband." He looked at me, his eyes bulging with hate. "You ruined this!" he screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "You were jealous. You could not stand that Chloe was winning, so you brought your freak husband here to humiliate me. If you had just stayed in the rain where you belonged, none of this would have happened." Chloe turned to look at me, her eyes wild. For a second, I thought she might apologize. I thought she might see that Brad was the villain, but old habits die hard. She looked at me, and she looked at Elijah, and she saw the cause of her pain. "You did this," she sobbed, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You were always jealous of me, Maya. You could not let me have one day. You had to bring him here and ruin everything." My mother, Sarah, rushed to Chloe's side, but she glared at me over her daughter's shoulder. "How could you?" she hissed. "How could you destroy your sister's happiness like this?" I stood there watching them turn on each other and then turn on me. It was pathetic. It was tragic. And it was exactly what they deserved. The staff was rolling up the white carpet, now rolling up the path to a future that never existed. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. I turned to Elijah, who was watching the scene with a calm, impassive expression. "I think we have seen enough," I said. He nodded. "Agreed. Let us go get that burger." We turned our backs on the chaos, leaving them to fight over the scraps of their delusions, while the staff dismantled their fantasy piece by piece. I stopped walking. Elijah had his hand on the small of my back, guiding me toward the exit, but I planted my feet. The chaos of the room swirled around us, the staff frantically clearing expensive centerpieces, the few remaining guests scurrying out like cockroaches exposed to light, and the sobbing heap of white tulle that was my sister on the floor. I looked at the exit, then I looked back at Chloe. It wasn't enough. Leaving them to their misery was the high road, but I had taken the high road for 32 years, and it had led me nowhere but to a plastic chair in the rain. I needed to finish this. I gently removed Elijah's hand from my waist. He looked down at me questioning, but he did not try to stop me. He saw the look in my eyes, a cold clarity that matched his own. I turned around and walked back toward the altar. On a nearby table abandoned by a fleeing investor sat a half-finished glass of red wine. It was a heavy-bodied Cabernet, dark as blood. I picked it up. The crystal felt cool and solid in my hand. I walked slowly toward Chloe. She was sitting on the floor, her legs sprawled out in front of her, the voluminous skirt of her Vera Wang gown pooling around her like a cloud. Her makeup was streaked with black tears, and her chest heaved with hysterical sobs. When she saw my shoes approach, she stopped crying for a second and looked up. Her eyes were red and swollen, filled with a mixture of hatred and confusion. She looked small. For the first time in my life, the golden child looked small. "Are you happy now?" She rasped, her voice raw. "You ruined my life. You and your husband destroyed everything." I stood over her, looking down from my vantage point. I remembered how she had towered over me in the garden just yesterday. I remembered the smirk on her face as she tilted her wrist. I remembered the cold, wet sensation of the wine soaking into my skin, and the cruelty in her voice when she called me dirt. I swirled the wine in the glass, watching the crimson liquid coat the sides. "Do you remember what you said to me yesterday?" "Chloe," I asked, my voice conversational, calm. "We were in the garden. You were holding a glass just like this one. You told me that red was a bad color on me. You told me I looked better wet and dirty because it was my natural state." Chloe glared at me, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. "Go away, Maya. Just go away." I took a step closer, my shadow falling over her. "You said I was ruining your aesthetic," I continued. "You had me thrown out into the rain because you didn't want a stain on your perfect white wedding." I tilted the glass just a fraction. A single drop of dark red wine fell. It landed on the bodice of her dress, right over her heart, blooming instantly into a dark, jagged star against the pristine white silk. Chloe gasped, scrambling backward on her hands, but the heavy dress weighed her down, trapping her. "What are you doing?" she shrieked, her eyes wide with panic. "I am just helping you with the aesthetic," I said. Then I turned my wrist. I didn't throw it like she had. I didn't make it look like an accident. I poured it slowly, deliberately. The thick red stream cascaded down onto her lap, splashing over the intricate lace embroidery, soaking into the layers of tulle and silk. It looked violent. It looked permanent. Chloe screamed a high-pitched sound of pure horror, slapping at the liquid with her hands, which only smeared it further, turning her hands red as well. I watched until the last drop fell from the glass. The stain was massive, ugly, and impossible to hide. It ruined the dress completely. It ruined the resale value. It ruined the memory. "There," I said, setting the empty glass down on the floor next to her. "Now we are even." My mother let out a gasp from the front row, where she was still paralyzed by shock, but I ignored her. I kept my eyes on my sister, who was staring at her ruined dress in disbelief. "You are a monster," Chloe whispered, shaking. "I am a mirror," I replied. "I am just reflecting you back to yourself. And by the way, since Brad's credit cards are declined and his assets are frozen, someone is going to have to pay for this venue. The manager mentioned the outstanding balance is $230,000. I leaned down close so she could hear every syllable. "I hope you have some savings, Chloe, because unlike you, I don't pay for people who treat me like dirt. Good luck with the bill." I straightened up, smoothing my own dress. I felt light. The weight of their approval, the heavy burden of trying to be good enough for people who would never love me, it was all gone. I had washed it away with a glass of wine. I turned my back on my sister for the last time, and walked toward my husband, who was waiting for me with a look of absolute pride on his face. Elijah and I walked out of the banquet hall and into the cool night air. The rain had stopped, leaving the vineyard smelling of wet earth and ozone. The gravel parking lot was illuminated by the soft glow of the venue lights, but it felt worlds away from the suffocating luxury inside. Marcus was waiting by the open door of the Rolls-Royce, the engine purring softly, a beast ready to carry us away. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with air that didn't smell of hypocrisy. I reached for the door handle, ready to leave this entire chapter of my life behind. Maya, wait. The voice was breathless, desperate. I turned to see my parents stumbling out of the main doors. My mother Sarah was holding her heels in one hand, running barefoot across the wet gravel, her expensive dress dragging in the mud. My father David was right behind her, his face flushed and sweating, his tie askew. They looked nothing like the composed, regal figures who had sat in the front row just an hour ago. They looked frantic. They looked like people who had just realized they had bet on the wrong horse and were trying to switch tickets after the race had ended. They skidded to a halt in front of us, panting. My mother reached out as if to touch my arm, but Elijah stepped between us, his body a solid wall of protection. She recoiled slightly, but then plastered a smile on her face, a smile so bright and fake it looked painful. "Elijah," she gasped, trying to catch her breath. "Oh, Elijah. We were just so shocked back there. What a misunderstanding." She looked at him with wide, adoring eyes, the same look she used to give Brad. "Conry qui kume," she cooed, her voice dripping with syrup. "I always knew there was something special about you. I told David, didn't I? I said Elijah has a quiet strength. He is a dragon hiding in the clouds. Wrong and Min. That is what you are." I stared at her in disbelief. Just yesterday, she had called him a ditch digger. She had told me not to let him park in the driveway. Now he was a dragon. The speed of the pivot was enough to give anyone whiplash. David nodded vigorously, wiping sweat from his forehead with a silk handkerchief. "Absolutely, son. We are so proud of you. That was quite a show back there. You really put Brad in his place. We never liked him anyway, you know. Always too flashy. Not solid like you." Elijah didn't say a word. He just looked at them, his expression unreadable. My mother took his silence for encouragement. She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a confidential whisper. "Look, the situation with Brad is unfortunate. He really deceived us all, didn't he? But the important thing is that we are family, and families help each other. Poor Chloe is devastated. And this bill for the wedding, well, it is substantial. $230,000. It is a lot of money for us, especially since we invested heavily in Brad's company last month." She let out a nervous little laugh. "But for a man of your stature, Elijah, it is probably nothing, right? So we were hoping, since you are the head of the family now in a way, maybe you could help your sister-in-law out. Just handle the venue bill. It would be such a blessing. We are family after all." The audacity was breathtaking. They had watched me get thrown out into the rain. They had watched Chloe pour wine on me. They had laughed when I was called dirt. And now, 5 minutes later, they were asking my husband to pay for the party where I was humiliated. Elijah finally spoke. He laughed, a short, humorless sound that cut through the night air like a knife. "Family," he repeated, tasting the word like it was spoiled meat. "You want to talk about family, Sarah?" He took a step toward them, and for the first time I saw my parents flinch. Where was this family yesterday, when my wife was sitting on a plastic chair in the pouring rain, shivering and crying? Where was the family then? Were you bringing her a coat? Were you inviting her inside? No. You were inside drinking $500 wine and laughing about how she ruined your view. My mother opened her mouth to protest, but Elijah cut her off, his voice rising. Where was the family when Brad grabbed her arm? Where was the family when Chloe poured wine on her? You watched. You watched them treat your own daughter like an animal and you did nothing. You didn't just allow it. You encouraged it because you thought Brad had money. You thought he was your ticket to the high life. He looked at my father, who was staring at his shoes. You sold your daughter for a check, David. And now that the check has bounced, you want a refund. You want me to bail you out. No, Elijah. Please. My mother begged, tears welling up in her eyes. It wasn't like that. We love Maya. You love money, Elijah corrected. And you love status. You don't know the first thing about love. Love protects. Love shows up. Love doesn't leave its child in the rain. He reached out and took my hand, pulling me toward the car. Brad's debt is his own, Elijah said over his shoulder. And Chloe's debt is hers. If you invested in his company, that is your loss. I suggest you get good lawyers. You are going to need them, but don't look at me. My charity is reserved for people who have souls. He opened the car door for me. I got in, sinking into the soft leather of the Rolls-Royce. I looked out at my parents, standing in the mud, looking small and pathetic in the headlights. They weren't powerful. They weren't impressive. They were just greedy people who had lost their bet. And as Elijah got in beside me and closed the door, shutting out their pleas, I realized I didn't feel sorry for them at all. I just felt done. Elijah held the heavy door of the Rolls-Royce open for me, a silent invitation to step into a new life. But I paused, one foot on the plush floor mat. I could feel my parents' eyes burning into my back, desperate and terrified. I knew if I got into that car without saying what needed to be saying, it would haunt me. I would always wonder if they truly understood why I was leaving. I turned back slowly, withdrawing my foot from the sanctuary of the vehicle to stand on the wet gravel one last time. My mother Sarah reached out a hand, her fingers trembling. Her face was a mask of ruined mascara and panic. Maya, she pleaded, her voice cracking. Please do not leave like this. We can fix this. We can start over. You are our daughter. I looked at her hand. The manicured nails, the diamond rings that she valued so much. I looked at my father, David, who was wiping his face with a handkerchief, looking everywhere but at me. Start over. I repeated the words, tasting like iron in my mouth. Mom, I spent 32 years trying to start over with you. Every birthday, every Christmas, every promotion I got, I thought maybe this is the time. Maybe this is when they will look at me the way they look at Chloe. Maybe this is when I will be enough. I took a step closer to them, forcing them to look me in the eye. I made you pottery with my own hands, and you called it mud. I said, my voice steady and calm. I built a career designing landscapes, bringing life out of the earth, and you called it digging ditches. I married a man who treats me like a queen, who loves me for exactly who I am. And you treated him like a stray dog you wanted to kick off your porch. That was before my father interjected weakly. We did not know who he was. Exactly, I snapped. You did not know he was rich. That is the only thing that changed David. Elijah is the same man he was yesterday. He has the same heart, the same hands, the same values. The only difference is that now you know he can sign a check with 7 zeros on it. I let out a breath. I felt like I had been holding since I was a child. I realized something tonight, standing in the rain, while you drank wine and laughed at me. I realized that I have been begging for water from a stone. I spent 32 years begging for a scrap of affection, waiting for you to love me. But today I finally understand the truth. You are not capable of loving me because I cannot buy you anything. Money is the only thing you have ever truly loved. It is the only language you speak. My mother sobbed a harsh, ugly sound. Maya, that is not true. It is true, I said, cutting her off. You loved Brad because he promised you millions. You loved Chloe because she was the vessel for that money. And now that the money is gone, look at you. You are terrified. You aren't scared of losing me, Mom. You are scared of the debt. You are scared of the bills. You are scared that your golden child has dragged you into financial ruin. I gestured toward the tent, where the staff was still dismantling the wedding that never happened. Brad conned you. He took your investment money and he spent it on a fantasy. Now the bill is due. The venue, the caterers, the florists, they are all going to come looking for payment. And since Brad is broke and Chloe has never worked a day in her life, guess who they are going to call? My father looked ill, his face gray in the moonlight. So go, I said, my voice hard as diamond. Go do what you do best, chase the money. Go find a way to pay for your golden daughter's mistakes. Go mortgage your house. Go sell your cars. Do whatever you have to do to keep up appearances, because that is all that has ever mattered to you. I looked from my mother to my father, etching this moment into my memory. But do not call me. Do not text me. Do not show up at my house. I am not your retirement plan. I am not your safety net, and I am certainly not your daughter anymore. Maya. You cannot mean that, my mother wailed, taking a step toward me. I stepped back, effectively closing the distance between me and my husband. I mean every word. You made your choice in the rain. Now live with it. I turned around and ducked into the back seat of the Rolls-Royce. The smell of rich leather and Elijah's clean scent enveloped me instantly. I pulled the heavy door shut with a solid, definitive thud that silenced my mother's cries. The sound was the most satisfying thing I had ever heard. It was the sound of a book closing, the sound of a prison cell unlocking. Through the tinted glass I saw them standing there, frozen in the headlights of the car. They looked small. They looked pathetic. They stood amidst the mud and the gravel, two people who had traded their own flesh and blood for fool's gold and lost everything. Elijah reached over and took my hand, squeezing it tight. "You okay?" he asked softly. I looked at him, and then I looked out the window as Marcus put the car in gear, and we began to roll away, leaving my parents choking on our dust. "I am perfect," I said. "Drive." The Rolls-Royce glided over the asphalt, like a phantom moving through the night so smoothly that I could barely feel the road beneath us. The vineyards of Napa Valley rushed past the tinted windows, blurring into dark shapes against the moonlit sky. Inside the cabin, the silence was absolute, but for the first time in my life, it did not feel heavy or oppressive. It felt like peace. It felt like the quiet after a hurricane had finally blown itself out, leaving the air clean and new. I leaned my head back against the plush leather seat, closing my eyes and letting the tension drain from my shoulders. The image of my parents standing in the mud, the image of Chloe sitting in her ruined dress. They were fading already, replaced by the steady warmth of the man sitting beside me. Elijah reached across the center console and took my hand again, his thumb tracing the lines of my palm. I opened my eyes and turned to look at him. In the soft ambient light of the dashboard, he looked tired but content. He looked like my husband, the man who drank coffee on the porch and fixed the leaky faucet. But there was a new weight to him, a gravity that came from revealing his true self. "I am sorry," he said, his voice low and rough with emotion. "I am sorry I kept this from you for so long, Maya. I know secrets are poison, and I hate that I lied to you. But I had to be sure. I have been burned before by people who saw my bank account before they saw me. I needed to know that you loved Elijah, the man who drives a beat-up truck. I needed to know you loved me for my heart, not my portfolio." I lifted his hand to my lips, kissing his knuckles. I thought about the last 2 years. I thought about the way he held me when I cried about my job. I thought about the way he made me laugh when I felt worthless. I thought about the way he had just walked into a den of lions and torn it down brick by brick to protect me. "You idiot," I whispered, smiling through the fresh tears gathering in my eyes. "I fell in love with you when you were fixing my flat tire in the rain. I fell in love with you when you brought me soup when I had the flu. I love you because you are kind and strong and real. The money does not change who you are. It just means we can buy a really nice house for our dogs. Elijah chuckled, the sound vibrating through his chest. I love you, Maya, he said. And I promise no more secrets. From now on, it is us against the world, and we have a lot of resources to win that fight. I snuggled closer to him, resting my head on his shoulder. I love you too, I said. But I have to admit something. Watching you stand up there and fire Brad, watching you take him down with just a few words and a stack of paper, that was possibly the most attractive thing I have ever seen. You were incredibly sexy back there, Mr. Vance. He laughed again, a full bright sound that chased away the last shadows of the evening. Well, I aim to please Mrs. Vance. A few miles down the road, the neon sign of a roadside diner flickered in the darkness. It was a classic American burger joint, the kind with grease stains on the menu and milkshakes thick enough to stand a spoon in. Without asking, Elijah tapped on the partition and told Marcus to pull over. The Rolls-Royce looked ridiculous parked next to the rusted sedans and motorcycles in the lot, but neither of us cared. We walked inside, hand in hand, me in my wine-stained dress and him in his flannel shirt, and we ordered the biggest burgers on the menu with a side of onion rings and 2 chocolate shakes. We sat in a red vinyl booth eating like starving teenagers, laughing until our sides hurt. It was the best meal I had ever tasted, better than any $500 steak, better than any wedding cake. As I dipped a fry into my shake, my phone buzzed on the table. I hesitated, then glanced at the screen. It was a notification from a local news app. Disaster in Napa wedding of tech CEO, ends in fraud arrests and chaos. I tapped the link. There was a video taken by one of the guests, showing the moment the police arrived to escort Brad off the premises, presumably after the venue manager called them about the unpaid bill. In the background of the video, you could see my parents arguing with the caterers, looking frantic and small. The comments section was already exploding with people mocking the groom and speculating about the family. I showed the phone to Elijah. He glanced at it, then pushed it away. Let them be famous, he said, taking a bite of his burger. We have better things to do, like figure out where we are going for our honeymoon. I am thinking Italy. Or maybe we just buy an island. I looked at him, and then I looked out the window at the dark highway stretching out before us. The nightmare was over. My family was in the rearview mirror, shrinking with every passing second. I took a deep breath of the greasy diner air and smiled. An island sounds nice, I said. But right now, I just want another fry. Elijah pushed the basket toward me, his eyes shining with love. Anything you want, Maya. Anything you want. This story teaches us that true worth is never defined by price tags, titles, or the approval of others, but by character and integrity. Maya's family was so blinded by their obsession with status that they mistook kindness for weakness and silence for submission. They learned too late that family isn't just about blood, it's about who stands by you in the rain. When you finally stop seeking validation from those committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim your power. The greatest revenge isn't destruction, but living a life of authentic happiness and success that they can no longer touch. If you believe in choosing self-respect over toxic family loyalty, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories of justice served cold.